everybody. My name is Nate, if I haven't met, and I am so happy that we get to spend these moments together. There's a ton of things that you could be doing right now, but you're at church, and I love it. Everybody join online. Thanks for being here as well. If you're listening to this even later, sometime in the week, next week or two, thanks for joining in. So we're in this series. We took a brief interruption last week as we looked at our Teach Me journal and the concept of abide, but we started a series called Follow a few weeks ago, and it's all from one chapter in the Bible, Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9. Luke has a very unique biography of the life of Jesus. Luke is not a Jewish person, so sometimes when you read, it can help those of us who don't understand Jewish culture because he explains things for his Greek or non-Jewish audience. And he does this really incredible thing that for the first 8 chapters of the book of Luke, it's about Jesus and chronicling what he did. And then in chapter 9, it makes this really significant shift where Jesus looks at his disciples and then says, okay, now it's your turn to do what I've been doing. And this whole thought of being a disciple means this. It's a Greek word, mathetes. And it was this ancient tradition where there was a teacher, rabbi, and a teacher would invite people to follow, and that meant you were a disciple. If you followed a teacher, you were a disciple, and then it was the way that lives were transformed. Through the process of following the rabbi, you were renewed, you were changed, you were taught, you were completely different years after you began this journey of following your rabbi. And so Jesus has invited 12 different men to follow him. And in Luke chapter 9, he tells them, now, you're not just observers. I need you to go and do these same things. And so he teaches us early on that being a follower of Jesus is not a spectator sport. Jesus isn't just looking for fans. He's looking for people who engage in the mission and actually learn to do and replicate the message and the ministry of Jesus. So what we're about to read, if you work in advertising or PR, you'll read this and you'll go like, what in the world is Jesus doing? He's like self-destructing. Because all these crowds have been coming near and his popularity is growing. And Jesus is just going to give some of the toughest words, deeply challenging, inviting people to lives not of necessarily happiness, but of significance. And so he's kind of going to burst everybody's bubble a little bit. And if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, if you're spiritually unresolved, you need to listen to this because this is what Jesus is inviting us to. If you are a disciple of Jesus, these words continue to challenge us to the very core. Here's what it reminds me of. When I was a senior in high school, I don't know if they still do this, but into the lunchroom, we were all had a big lunchroom. They let military recruiters come in one day. And we were eating, and the Air Force guy stood up, and I looked at him, and I was really seriously considering going into the military at that point. And Air Force guy, he's just sharp, and he stood up, and he said, listen, Air Force is the greatest branch of all time. And if you join the Air Force, here's some of the things that will benefit you. He talked about job training, and he talked about GI Bills. He just talked about what the wonderful life that you could have in the Air Force living around the world. Then the guy from the Army got up and said something similar, talked about the GI Bill and preparation for the future. And the Navy guy got up and talked to us about how joining the Navy could really benefit us. And then the Marine guy got up. Anybody? Yeah. And the Marine guy, after everybody told us how great it would be for us to join the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, the Marine guy got up and he literally did this. He stood at the podium and he didn't say a word. He just looked across the room. He said, from what I can tell, 1, maybe 2 of you have what it takes to be a Marine. And then he sat down. And guess whose line I went to? Along with everybody else. I think I'm the one, right? Yeah, it's got to be me, definitely. And if you just look, you'd be like, that's the worst advertising in the world for the Marines. But what he did is he said, hey, I'm not going to invite you into this because of how it's going to benefit you. And that's exactly what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. In Luke chapter 9, we'll start at verse 8. Once, when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, so that's a setting, some quiet place where Jesus is praying with his disciples, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist." That was Jesus' cousin. He had recently been executed by Herod. Others say Elijah, one of the Old Testament prophets who operated in this incredible, miraculous power, and all these amazing things happened. And still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. But what about you? He asked. Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, God's Messiah. So we'll talk about this in a moment, but two-word phrase, which is absolutely loaded with meaning and expectation. This is a Hebrew word, Messiah. Oftentimes in your Bibles, the Greek translation is Christ, okay? It means the promised one. You are God's Messiah, Peter says. And then notice this. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. And that's because if word got out that he was the Messiah, you're talking about an oppressed people group who are living under the thumb of Rome. They're economically oppressed, politically oppressed, they feel spiritually oppressed, all of this. And the hope of the Messiah was a great liberator who would bring them back to political influence, to political freedom, all of these things. And Jesus knows what most people anticipate this means in the first century. And he says, listen, strictly, don't tell anybody about this. He goes on. And he said, so he's going to redefine Messiah. Like radically redefine it. Because when they think Messiah, they're thinking liberator, they're thinking leader, they're thinking revolutionary, they're thinking somebody who's going to make everything wrong right. And he said, Son of Man. This is how Jesus most often refers to himself. It's from Daniel chapter 7, from Daniel's vision where he has this dream of multiple earthly kingdoms and then one kingdom that stands forever and is never conquered. It's the kingdom of Jesus. The Son of Man must suffer, not just once, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. And he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. So Jesus completely redefines their expectation of Messiah. He talks about suffering and rejection and death and resurrection. Then he said to them all, so this is what the Messiah is going to do. This is what I'm going to do, Jesus says. And then he invites them to follow him into this life that includes suffering, rejection, death, and resurrection. Then he said to them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life, self-preservation, he says, if you want to save your life, you'll lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? The word there is sometimes translated soul. It's the essence. You could lose the essence of who you truly are. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words, this is the new definition of the Messiah, the one who's going to suffer, be rejected, killed, and resurrected. If you're ashamed of what I'm about to do, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his glory and in the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. So why would Jesus, kind of at the pinnacle of his popularity, why would he just pop the bubble of all the expectations? Well, it's because what it means to follow Jesus is really different than what they anticipated would happen when the Messiah came to planet Earth. So let's walk through this. It begins, point number one is this. There's two questions. Point number one, two questions. Here's the first question. This question has been asked for 2,000 years. Jesus asked it, and people are still asking it. What do the crowds say about Jesus? Who do the crowds say that Jesus is? We could ask it this way. What do cultures, what do people groups say about the person of Jesus? And if we were able to interview 8 billion plus people on planet Earth today, we'd get all kinds of answers, wouldn't we? There'd be about 1 billion people on planet Earth today who would say this about Jesus. They'd say that Jesus was a messenger or a prophet of God, and his name was Isa. That's the Arabic translation for Jesus, Isa, and Isa is mentioned 25 times in the Quran. But the difference would be this, is that he was simply a human who was animated by God. He was an inferior prophet to the eventual great prophet Muhammad. About 1 billion people would say, well, we believe Jesus historically existed. We believe that he was a prophet, but his name was Isa, and he brought some good things, but it just kind of stops at that. There would be millions of people who would say Jesus was a terrific teacher. He was this enlightened human being who had ascended to a place where he had knowledge and truth, and people would respect the way that he taught. But this claim that he was Messiah, that's going a little too far. There would be many people, cultures would say this about Jesus. He was like a model, a prototype, an example for human beings to follow, that Jesus was this fully self-actualized human being who had gone beyond kind of the typical instincts that govern our lives, and he lives in this way that then inspires us to be better. A lot of people would say he's a myth. So not that he didn't exist, but he's like a Jungian archetype. He's a myth for us to pursue to inspire humanity. So that question continues to be asked. Who do the crowds say that I am? And there will always be a variety of answers. But then Jesus asked the second question. Ladies and gentlemen, I would say this. This is the most important question that we will ever answer. It's more important than what you'll do for vocation or how you define yourself or who you'll spend your life with. All those are important questions. But this second question where Jesus looks at the 12 and he says this, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? Who is Jesus? He wants to ask the question of each of us. And if you followed Jesus for a lot of years, the question still needs to be asked. Who is he? If you're navigating through your own spiritual journey right now, this is the penultimate question. This is the question that you are going to have to deal with. Who was Jesus? Was he just an inspiration? Was he somebody that you can model your life after? And Peter gives us the answer. You're God's Messiah. And wrapped up in that little 2-word phrase was so much. So the Jewish people for centuries, basically you can really find very few years where they're not occupied, where they're not dominated by another people group, where they're not in exile. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And through all of it, here was their prayer. It was a promise that God had given them centuries before, millennia before, that one day God would send a Messiah. And that Messiah, it's all about a deliverer, it's about leadership, it's about strength, it's about power, it's about justice. And so like a good Jewish person would pray at least once a day, oftentimes 3 times a day. We are talking about for thousands of years for God to send his deliverer, his Messiah, the one who would make everything wrong right. And Peter looks at Jesus and he says, you're not just another Elijah, another John the Baptist. You're not just some powerful human being. Peter puts everything on the line. And he says, you are God's promised one. That's who you are to me, Peter says. I've made that decision that you are the answer to all the prayers that all of my ancestors have been praying. You are the answer to my individual prayers when I've looked at the world and what's wrong and wondered, how do I reconnect with God? He looks Jesus in the eyes and he says, here's what I believe about you. You're God's Messiah. You're the solution. You're the one who has come to restore humanity. And I think this is the question, and it's not just one time. It's over and over. I think that there is a moment in time, if you're trying to figure out what you believe about Jesus, some point you're going to have to decide. Jesus is going to ask you the same question. Who do you say that I am? And you can say, hey, you're the one who helps me out. When I'm really in trouble, I pray to you. All right. That's not a Messiah, though. You're the one who inspires me. I love your teachings. Boy, they're really profound. That's not a Messiah. Messiah says, you're the one who saves me. You're the one who takes everything that's wrong and makes it right. And I don't think it's just a one-time decision. I think for those of us who've been following Jesus for a while, it is a decision that I make over and over and over and over again. That Jesus is still asking this question. When you face challenges at work or challenges in your relationship, when you're facing a financial crisis, whatever it might be, here's what I think Jesus has asked you. Who do you say that I am? In this moment, when you want to rely on your own strength, when you want to manipulate the situation, when you want to take control, who do you say that I am? And as a follower of Jesus, I need to pause. And I'm choosing not to get worried and upset and be filled with anxiety. I'm choosing to say this. You are God's Messiah. And as the Messiah, I can live life with peace. I don't have to be overwhelmed by what is happening right now. I am declaring that you are God's Messiah. So for all of us, this is a decision you make. I think it would be every day. It's when that moment, ethical choice lies before you. And I can do this or I can do this. Jesus says, who do you say that I am? You're the Messiah. Therefore, I'm taking this path because I know this is the path that Jesus, the promised one, the anointed one, would take. Who do you say that I am? Let Jesus ask you that question day after day after day. And would you never become tired of declaring, this is who you are. I may not feel it right now. I may not believe it with 100% of all that I am, but I am declaring that you are the Messiah. And then Jesus immediately silences him. He says, you cannot say this to anyone. Now, why in the world would Jesus say, hey, shut that down. I appreciate what you said, Peter. Well, it's because this word Messiah culturally for the Jews was tied with revolution. It was tied with, we're finally going to overthrow the Romans and we'll be powerful like we were centuries before when King David led us. And this is not the picture of Messiah that Jesus says he came to fulfill. That was another picture of Messiah because Jesus immediately redefines who the Messiah is. He says, don't tell anybody about this. And here's what I'm going to tell you. The Son of Man, Jesus is stepping into this concept of Messiah, the one who's going to establish an everlasting kingdom on planet Earth. How does he define what the Messiah will do? Must suffer many things. If you were one of the original disciples, you'd be like, what? No. The Messiah ends suffering. The Messiah is going to step in and all that injustice and brokenness in the world, the Messiah is going to fix that. And Jesus says, actually, the Messiah is going to step into suffering. He's going to absorb suffering. He's going to experience everything that a human being could ever experience. He's not immune to human pain. He's going to move towards pain. The Messiah must suffer many things. And then he says, and he will be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law. Now, what is that? Basically, that's anyone who's anyone in power. It would be like Jesus saying, yes, I'm the Messiah, and I'm going to be rejected by academia. I'm going to be rejected by the political system. I'm going to be rejected by all business leaders in the world. That's some serious rejection. Jesus says, this is what you have to understand about Messiah. Everybody's praying, everybody's anticipating. But this Messiah, what I came to do is not what they're anticipating, and they're gonna reject me because I haven't kicked out Rome. Because I came to fight some battles they didn't even know existed. The battle of sin, the battle of separation from God. And then he'll be killed. That's really bad news for your Messiah. But no. The Messiah is the conqueror. He kills bad guys. And Jesus says, no, I as the Messiah, I am going to die. I'm not gonna die of old age. I'm not gonna die in this like peaceful setting and ascend into oblivion and nothingness. I'm gonna be killed. I'm not even gonna have a control over my final destiny. But then it's linked with a fourth thing. And if it wasn't for this fourth thing, this would be really depressing. And he'll be raised. Raised from the dead. Suffering, rejection, death, and resurrection. And resurrection. And what Jesus is attempting to do is help them to prepare themselves for what is going to be happening over the next several months. They're gonna see Jesus beaten and flogged and rejected and spat upon, and crowds cry out against him, cry for him to be crucified. They're gonna watch him die on a cross. This is not what Messiah came to do, but it's all wrapped up in this, is that he would be resurrected. Because there's this problem that human beings have had. Do you know that there's a 100% mortality rate amongst human beings? 100%. Like, you can live to 99. God help you. In fact, just this week, I was invited to speak to a group of pastors, and Gene Getz was there. I don't know if you know Gene Getz. I think he's written like 48 books. And I had kind of thought, like, I don't know if I really want to live past 85. This guy was 91, sharp as a tack. I'm like, I'm going for it. If I can do that at 91, he was so incredible. Listen, but eventually all of us go, so death had to be conquered. This planet needed a resurrection. Human existence needs a resurrection. And the way to resurrection is through death. So Jesus redefines the two questions. Who do the crowds say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And then we move into the very next part after Jesus redefines Messiah and talks about suffering, rejection, death, and resurrection. He invites them into this new type of life. We know where the Messiah is headed, and he invites us to follow him. The invitation. So Jesus says, if anyone will come after me. So there's nothing compulsory about Jesus. He never demands or requires. Because what he is asking people into, Jesus didn't say, hey, listen. If anyone will come after me, I just want you to know that there's gonna be wealth, there's gonna be power, there's gonna be absolute safety and security, and like your life is gonna be filled with rainbows and unicorns and butterflies and pots of gold and bliss, continual bliss. Jesus doesn't compel people. It's voluntary, and he says, I told you where I'm going. I'm headed towards suffering, rejection, death, and resurrection. And if you want to follow me, you have to think about this. There's only one way to get to resurrection, and that's through all that other stuff. What everybody wants is just a resurrected life, right? We want the peace, tranquility, happiness, security, but Jesus says there's a pathway to get there. Something has to die before you can be resurrected. He says, if anyone would come after me, it is an invitation. For those of you who are unresolved right now, I just want you to know this. Jesus is not demanding anything from you, but he's being honest with you. If you want to follow me to a resurrected life, the path is not easy, but it's significant. And it's about resurrection. And it's about second chances, and it's about beauty, but there is a pathway to get there. If anyone would follow after me, he must deny himself. Oh, there's always something to leave. There's always denial. There's always sacrifice. And Jesus is just honest with his 12 disciples. They're going to follow him all the way to Jerusalem, and all but one of them are going to follow him to death. They too will be martyred. And Jesus says, listen, the path that I came to take, this Messiah, it's not about personal fulfillment and happiness and like how happy can you be. I'm asking you, if you want your life to matter, if you want to follow me, that means there are a lot of things that are important to you, that are instinctual. The Bible sometimes calls it your flesh, right? The old you that make you feel good, that make you feel secure, and you are going to have to deny those things. If you want to follow me, you're going to have to say no to immediate gratification. You're going to have to say no to personal pleasure, no to things that can make you feel secure but actually are empty. And so you just want to know this. If anyone come after me, he must deny himself. I've got to be in this place where I put aside my agenda, I put aside all of my hopes and dreams, and I say I'm now living for something much bigger, much more significant. I'm living in this new kingdom that the Son of Man has come to establish. Therefore, I've kind of got to shed myself of the old kingdom dynamics, of the old principles that govern the world. Must deny themselves, take up their cross. Okay. Just put yourself in the original disciples' shoes. In a matter of months, they'll see Jesus go to the cross. But they had all seen crucifixions before because Rome had borrowed the idea of crucifixion from the Babylonian Empire, and then they just enhanced it. And here's what crucifixion was about. It was about extenuating the process of death for as long as possible. You kept somebody alive as long as humanly possible with that amount of trauma. And execution was always about shame. It was picking up a cross. Excuse me, Jesus wasn't the only one who had to carry a cross. This was part of execution, is that you wanted to shame people and you wanted to intimidate any other potential offenders. And so execution was a big deal. It always happened at a crossroads. It always happened at a hill. It always happened at a city gate. So as many people as possible could see the shame and could see the power of Rome on display. And it intimidated. It terrified people. And Jesus says, okay, follow me, I'm the Messiah. Deny yourself and then pick up your cross. Who's executed? Thieves, murderers, and mainly it's people who aspired to overthrow Rome in one way or another. Who were all about this political agenda and were subservient. And Jesus says, okay, you want to follow me? All your messianic hopes? I'm going to ask you to deny yourself, and I'm going to ask you to pick up a cross. And when you pick up a cross, that means you're picking up a way of love. And you're picking up this idea that I am dying to the old me. And I'm dying to my responses to the old kingdom. And I am giving my life away. And I am living a life of surrender, a life that is generated by love. It's inspired by love and compassion. It's not about me anymore. It is not about me. It's about you. And then here's the next challenge. He says, pick up your cross. I wish it said once. But what does he say? Daily. To pick up your cross daily. Man. After day one, your back is raw and the splinters are already under your skin. And Jesus says, okay, the alarm clock went off. Pick up your cross and follow me. Choose a life of surrender. Where my life is yours, your will be done, not mine. It's daily surrender before Jesus and follow me. So Jesus wasn't just like, this isn't just like an invitation to some like horrific form of life. Jesus said, you're going to follow me. Because did Jesus do all those things? He denies himself, he picks up the cross, and then he's resurrected. And he's telling his disciples, the way to get there, where everybody wants to be, where there's harmony with God, where there's peace, where there's hope, it's through following me. I'm leading the journey. Jesus walked with the cross. He walked in self-denial. And he ends up at the point of resurrection. He says, that's where I'm asking you to follow me. I'm never asking you to do something that I was never willing to do, but I understand how you move from death to life. I understand how you move from pain to health. And it is through this life of significant surrender. It's not about finding a way to be as peaceful and happy as possible. It's about saying, this is not about me. I follow Jesus wherever he leads. I follow Jesus, and my personal needs and my personal fears do not matter in relation to the power of a cross. Follow me to resurrection, Jesus says. And I want to conclude with this. The last verses, I want to reread them. Jesus is going to invite us to lose your life to find a new life, okay? To do this trade-in. If anyone will come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. If my life is about making this existence as comfortable as possible, in the end, I'm going to lose it. But if I am willing, whoever loses his life for me, if I'm willing to say, listen, I take up your agenda for the world, God. You are my Messiah. I follow you wherever you go. You will save it. You will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, all the wealth, all the comforts of life, and yet lose or forfeit his very self? How do I find real life? I find my true life by surrendering and following Jesus. I want to end with a quote. I didn't realize this until earlier in this week, where I was finishing up my notes for this weekend. And it dawned on me, I taught this passage, I think a little over 12 years ago, when Stan and Ginger Simmons invited me, hey, come speak at our church. And Jen and I and our 4 kids came out. And Stan was headed towards retirement. And I was like really challenged with, well, what do you preach at a church like that? And there had been some talk about maybe your family could move out here. And so here's the temptation. You just want to preach the funniest, best sermon you have, right? Like, I'm going to bring out all my best illustrations. And I just felt like the Lord said, preach to them about discipleship. And I taught this passage. And I was like, well, that's going to shut that door. But there was a quote that I read at the end, and it's amazing how many times over the last 12 years I've heard people reference this quote. This is from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian. And as the Third Reich, the Nazi Party, came into power, he was so appreciated worldwide by his contributions to theology that his friends in Britain and the United States helped him to escape. But while he's living this very comfortable life in academia in the United States, teaching in a seminary, he has this profound sense that he's supposed to be in a different place. And so he goes back to Germany. And he begins this ministry trying to help the church, because much of the church had aligned themselves with the Nazi agenda. And so he begins to declare truth. He begins to stand against the Nazi agenda. Eventually, seeing the power of evil, he gets involved in several assassination plots trying to actually kill Adolf Hitler. They fail. He's arrested and imprisoned. And some of his writings I would highly suggest you read. The Cost of Discipleship and letters from prison. They're all letters he writes while he's being held by the Nazi regime. Eventually, just 3 days before the Allied forces come in and liberate Berlin, he's executed. But this is a quote that he writes in The Cost of Discipleship. When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die.